Hey guys, it's Er from Just My Typewriter, and I have accidentally purchased another project. So this is a little Adler tippa. It's a lightweight portable, or also known as an ultra portable. It comes in a plastic casing with a metal bottom, and it would have been sold by Adler/Tippa, which is a German-based brand. So it's built a little bit different than some of the American machines I've worked on before, and I bought it because it was pretty cheap at a local flea market. I put it under my workbench and then never got around to it. When I did start to look at it, I identified some issues that caused me a little bit of trouble in the repair process. The first thing I noticed was that the carriage really wasn't moving. The spacebar would advance the carriage, but none of the keys would make anything move on the typewriter. And when I see something like this, it could be a couple of different problems. The spacebar mechanism is separate from the mechanism that moves with the keystrokes. So I knew I was going to have to do a little bit of investigating. And the difficulty with some of these ultra portables or lightweight portables is they're so compact. It can be kind of tough to figure out what's going on because everything is stacked on top of each other and fit into a very slim casing. So the first thing I did was take apart what I knew how to take apart. There is a pretty simple teardown to at least strip the casing on something like this. There are 4 screws at the bottom as well as one in the middle, and then the sides also come off. They have some top screws here under the ribbon cover. This is the second machine that I've had in this same body design. I had an Adler Contessa, and on both of them this little plastic casing around the screw top has broken. So they aren't always the most attached here at the top. So I first took off these casing pieces to then go in and see if there was something that I could maybe clean out to make sure that it was all going to operate. In most cases, the cleaning step fixes a lot of problems for me, and I was really hopeful that going through and really clearly cleaning out a lot of these pathways, anything that looks sticky, would help solve the issue of not tripping some sort of escapement with the keystroke. So I did my normal cleaning. I usually go in with mineral spirits and some compressed air. I go in with a toothbrush and I scrub every key path down. Normally, if you've got keys that aren't advancing, I would recommend taking some mineral spirits to your type basket because maybe things are just sticky. So I did that a couple of times. I also went through and cleaned a few other areas on the machine. And then I went through and did a complete air dusting as well to get all of that mineral spirits out of the machine. I also noticed a bunch of sagging here in the middle on these middle keys. They just seem to hang a little bit lower than anything else, so I thought I would also have to go through and do a little bit of adjusting on these. I didn't really know what would cause this, so that was a problem I knew I was going to have to deal with later. I also tried to get the entire carriage assembly out, thinking that maybe I could clean from the top of this. I wasn't very successful in trying to dismantle this. I wasn't really sure how it came out of here, so eventually I flipped the machine over and tried to figure out what was causing the machine not to advance with a keystroke. This is one of those things where you're just going to have to test a bunch and poke at things. I did ask for some expert advice here. I did message Typewriter Chicago and get some of his advice for how to tackle this, and he mentioned that there probably was a trip arm on the bottom of the machine that was bent at the wrong angle that wouldn't click forward in the escapement to move the carriage forward a space with each keystroke. I went through and looked at all of these little levers on the bottom, and I don't know what most of these do, so I was kind of confused. And eventually I just had to try typing with keys on the bottom versus typing with a spacebar and look at it all from underneath the typewriter and see what advanced the carriage versus what didn't. And what I noticed was this little trip arm here wasn't clicking the full escapement forward for a full space when using a keystroke move. So this to me is an indication that something maybe was dropped or not adjusted correctly, so that this little lever wasn't high enough or bent at the correct angle to move forward with that advancement. Now, it was at a perpendicular or 90-degree angle in here, so I thought it looked right, but in reality, I really had to bend it to more of like a 70-degree angle, or I don't know what's over 90, like a 120 angle to make sure that it would advance that specific trigger in the machine to make sure that the whole carriage would advance. This took a lot of just testing and bending. The metal here was soft enough for me to bend it at different increments, turn it back over, hit the key and see if it advanced the carriage, and I wanted it to do this consistently, so move the carriage every time that trigger got clicked. Once I had the keys advancing the carriage at a normal rate, I went through and put the casing all back on and did a type test. Now the type test worked. I was able to type with all the keys on the machine, but I went to then use the machine to write a pen pal letter, and I started to notice all of these issues on the machine that weren't solved by my simple bending of that trigger lever. Now, I usually go through and write a pen pal letter just to test the machine further to see what's not working on it over a longer piece of writing. This is really helpful because you might have something work for a few lines and then it starts to not work. So going through and writing a full letter can be really helpful. So it revealed some of these issues, like again, all those keys sagging in the middle. I wasn't able to fix that. I also had a problem with a lot of the serifs not typing all the way on the page. So I'd get the bottom half of letters, both lowercase and uppercase, but then I wouldn't be able to get the top of these letters, and it made the page look really sloppy not having some of these serifs on top. The other thing I noticed was that, again, it was really hard to type with some of these keys. They weren't consistently going up and coming all the way down. So I knew I still had to go back in and do more work. I also noticed that these keys had just a lot of discoloration on them. Probably was used by someone who was smoking, and so we had some tar here on the keys. So I started by going through and cleaning the key tops again. With any kind of residue like this, I find a lot of coats of simple green and scrubbing and just consistent time is really helpful. So I did go through and do this a couple rounds. I then went through and started to look at the type slugs. That sagging in the middle, I wasn't sure what was causing it, but I was figuring that it was probably a wrong amount of spacing between whatever was holding the key in place and whatever was holding the type slug in place. Because when I took all the type slugs out of the basket, which you can do, and I have a video on how to do this, which I'll link down in the description. When I took out all those type slugs, the keys were all at the correct height, meaning that when they were installed, there was the wrong length between the key and the type slug, and that's what was holding it down at a lower level. Removing all of the type slugs also allowed for me to clean the basket, so this will also help if you have any issue with a key not working correctly, if something's sticky, it doesn't come all the way back down. So I was able to go through and more thoroughly clean all those keys. What I noticed as I was taking out these type slugs is that if I switched around some of the linkages from the type slug to the key, they would start to sit at the correct height. Now I tried to swap them around and see if they were just put in there incorrectly, and eventually I ran into the problem where I'd have all of them installed, but I'd have 2 leftover linkages and nothing seemed to sit at the right height. And then I thought back to the fact that that original trigger was at the wrong angle and that somebody might have dropped this machine. If they had dropped this machine, it's also possible that they could have bent some of those linkages up too far and it made some of those keys sit at the wrong height. So then I started to go through and I started with just one key and I started to bend from the bottom the linkage associated with that key to see if I could get the height at the correct angle. And by doing some bending at this linkage, which is just a little wire piece of metal, I was able to get that singular key to sit at the right height. And then I started to go through and do this same process on all the other keys that were sitting lower in the type basket. What I found was a lot of these keys in the middle, they just had the wrong amount of linkage there. I had to bend the linkage further down, further toward the bottom of the basket to get that key to sit up a little bit higher. And this was really successful for me. Once I had them all bent at an angle where they would sit straight on the keyboard, I went through and did a type test to make sure that all the keys would go up and down and return smoothly back to the basket. Now, even with all of these type slugs now adjusted to sit at the right height, both in the basket and in the keys, I still was missing all of my serifs, so the tops of all of my letters. I thought this was going to be a shift height problem, that I'd have to go in and change all of the shifts, and that seemed kind of intimidating on this machine because it requires a specific tool. I did find a really helpful tutorial from Phoenix Typewriter, which I will link down below, on how to adjust that shift height. But I had posted about this problem on the Antique Typewriter Maintenance Facebook group, and someone suggested a different tutorial by Phoenix Typewriter for adjusting the ribbon height. So the ribbon in your typewriter has an adjustment on it that allows for it to go a certain height when typing. And this again is just a little linkage that could be bent forward or backward to help lower or raise the height of that ribbon vibrator. This is an adjustment I have never done before and I had no idea how it worked. So when I found this video tutorial, it was super easy to follow and play around with this linkage to make sure that I would get that ribbon going up to the correct height. So after trying this a little bit and following that video tutorial, I was able to get the ribbon to raise higher and type then with all the letter. I tested it with both black and red, and eventually I was able to get all of the letter typing correctly on the ribbon and all in line with each other. So I did another type test with the machine. And this went really well, except I noticed when I would go between shift and shift lock or caps lock, suddenly my capital letters would be typing on half of the line of my shift move. And I didn't know how it was possible that the caps lock would be at a different height than the actual shift mechanism. And then I went back to that tutorial of the shift height and found that Dwayne from Phoenix Typewriter actually outlined how you can adjust the caps lock height. Again, something I've never had to do before. So I followed his tutorial. On this machine, it's actually super simple. There's a little screw here on the caps lock lever that you can unscrew and adjust the height of. So just like I had done with the ribbon, I went through and tested different heights until I got the caps lock move to sit at the same height as the shift lock or the shift move. So now they were all typing in line with each other. A lot of these adjustments are things that I'm not always doing on machines, and it's very different to do them on a German build machine than it is to do on an American design machine, something like a Smith Corona or a Royal. There are a lot more linkages in these German machines that allow for you to do those individual adjustments, and that was something I had to adapt to as I was working on this machine. I was very lucky that there were a lot of tutorials online, all of which I have linked down below for you to also use on your machines. And it was also really helpful to go to my typewriter maintenance community and ask for assistance. It really put me in the right direction. So after a successful type test, it was time to list and sell this typewriter. And 2 days after listing, I found a buyer. They messaged me and wanted to meet halfway, so I went to Frenchtown. Editing Sarah here. I just wanted to let you know if you like content like this, there are some other videos here on this YouTube channel, as well as on my Instagram at just.my.typewriter. I want to thank you all so much for watching and remind you, you're just my typewriter. Now there is a cat present. Come here, Mama. Say bye-bye. You don't look very happy.